A call to review the reinvestigation of 9 Indigenous deaths. Ontario allows non-urgent surgeries to resume. And the latest on the protests and blockades across the country. Good evening and thank you for joining us. Ontario's Chief Coroner, Dr. Dirk Heyer, has called for an expert review of the 9 reinvestigations of sudden deaths involving Indigenous people here in Thunder Bay. The new probes were a key recommendation of the OIPRD's Broken Trust report in 2018, but now there are questions about potential conflicts of interest among those on that reinvestigation team, including Heyer himself. Vasilios Bellows explains.
We recognize that we weren't the right people to be overseeing this because of the potential that we could impact recommendations that could come to ourselves. And that's not right.
Chief Coroner Dr. Dirk Heyer was one of the people on the committee appointed by the Office of the Independent Police Review Director to oversee the 9 death reinvestigations. The investigation team was led by a retired OPP superintendent. The findings have yet to be released, but Heyer has heard concerns about conflicts of interest due to the close relations of police and coroners in this region, which prompted his call for an expert review of the committee's work.
There's going to be a specific writing team brought together under the authority of the Coroners Act to take all of the information that we learn through these reinvestigations from the families, from investigators, from others participating, and prepare a report and potential recommendations. That'll be up to them, potential recommendations to all of us.
The reinvestigation process put an emphasis on consultation with the Indigenous community. This was to ensure a fair process and just outcomes of the investigation itself. Heyer noted that this emphasis on collaboration needs to be prevalent in the expert review of the committee and when that independent panel authors the final report.
Indigenous communities, Indigenous leadership, families who are impacted by this, that's fundamental to be informing what the report will prepare, what the report will report on, and what recommendations may arise. So they will. This is, in my perspective, going to have an Indigenous lens to the report itself.
There is currently no timeline as to when we can expect the report from the expert review team to be released, with the process still in its early stages. Vasilios Bellows, TBT News.
The Ford government has announced it's now going to allow the resumption of non-emergency surgeries as province-wide hospitalizations decline. And there's also good news for students who can once again participate in extracurricular activities, including high-contact sports. The announcement was made by Dr. Kieran this afternoon. The province is also reportedly considering accelerating its plan to ease other restrictions as well. Colin DeMello reports.
Living with COVID-19 in Ontario is now being fast-tracked. Sources tell CTV News that Premier Doug Ford has personally asked for new regulations to speed up the timeline to relax restrictions.
We've seen the hospitalization and ICU capacity really start to come down very, very quickly, so we are constantly monitoring that to see what amendments could be made and when they can be made.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Today, Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health confirmed his office is reviewing all public health measures, from proof of vaccination to mandatory masking, and even when capacity limits could be lifted.
We are actively planning what the future looks like and laying out timelines for what public health measures can be lifted and when.
The province says the improving situation means surgeries, which were cancelled or postponed, can now resume in a staged approach across Ontario. Schools can immediately resume extracurricular activities, music class, and high-contact sports. And even the reopening timeline set by the province just weeks ago is now in flux.
We've built the date for February 21st of reopening. That date may be reviewed next week. As well, you may recall we had a date of March 14th for subsequent opening of mass gathering events. I think given the rapid decline in all our case counts, we will follow Ontario data. We will make Ontario-based plans.
What's unclear is when the proof of vaccination program will be eliminated. The province says it's not going to change the definition of fully vaccinated to 3 doses. So the Science Advisory Table says that reduces the effectiveness of the program, meaning it could be lifted sooner rather than later. Mandatory masking will likely be the last to be lifted.
I do think masking in public indoor spaces like transit, subways, buses will be maintained until we really have very low endemicity, and that would be cases below 10 per 100,000.
The redesigned plan seems to fit in with Ontario's new approach.
Ontario is well positioned to make the pivot to living with COVID-19.
But Dr. Kieran Moore insists he is still following the data.
We will make an Ontario-focused, Ontario-based, data-driven, science-driven decision.
He's promising more information to come next week. Colin DeMello, CTV News.
So while hospitalizations across the province may be in decline, COVID-19 numbers at the Regional Health Sciences Centre are back up again across the board today after dipping on Wednesday. There are now 47 COVID patients in hospital, up from 40 a day ago. And intensive care numbers are up as well, from 6 to 9. The overall hospital occupancy rate is back above capacity at more than 106%, and ICU occupancy has risen to nearly 91%. There is some positive news today. The COVID-19 outbreak at Hogarth Riverview Manor is now over, according to the health unit. There are now 11 active outbreaks across the district. The federal government is pledging support for some area First Nations dealing with rising COVID-19 cases. The Sioux Lookout First Nations Health Authority is now reporting 367 cases across its 16 communities. There are 152 cases in Mishkegowgaming, a community of just 1,300 people near Pickle Lake. Pekanjicum has 74 infections, and Abmatung First Nation is now up to 69 cases. The federal support was announced by Indigenous Services Minister Patty Hajdu during her weekly update on COVID in First Nations.
This morning, Minister Blair announced that an RFA had been approved for Mishkegowgaming First Nation in Ontario, which currently is dealing with an outbreak and increases in cases. Similarly, a request for assistance has also been approved today for Ibumatang First Nation.
The request for assistance will allow the Canadian Rangers to help out in those communities as a large number of residents either isolate or recover from the virus. Hundreds of home and cottage owners north of Lappy are strongly opposed to the development of more gravel pits in their area. Those against the aggregate pits say the added traffic would be too dangerous, as the narrow roads are already unsafe. But one of the companies waiting to construct a new pit near One Island Lake is defending its plans. Corey Nordstrom has the details.
Safety concerns have residents of Fowler Township ringing alarm bells over two proposed gravel pits in the area. A 5-kilometer stretch on Gilbride Road is the proposed site of the Milne Hawkeye Lake pit and the Kangas pit by Bruno's, which Fowler residents such as Eric Zakrewski are against.
Both companies are looking for permits that will allow them to actually haul up to 40,000 dump trucks per year of aggregates down the only road that all of the residents can use. So a lot of people have been watching this. They're really concerned.
Representatives from Milne Crushing and Screening were not available to comment. Dante D. Gregorio, a project manager for Bruno's Contracting, disputes the claims by Zakrewski.
40,000 loads of aggregate being removed from these sources is totally unrealistic.
He explains that initially the two companies wanted to remove larger quantities, but after concerns were raised, they drastically lowered the yearly loads they would pull from the sources.
Specifically, our correspondence to Mr. Zakrewski has indicated that our absolute maximum upset limit is in the range of 8,800 loads per annum, maximum upset. And I know the most recent correspondence I've seen from the other proponent has indicated he's projecting around 1,700.
Even if there are fewer gravel trucks on Gilbride Road, Zakrewski believes the roadway is currently meeting the bare minimum standard, and he's commissioned an independent engineering study to prove his point.
Over 25% of the 5 kilometers of road that these companies are proposing to use is completely unsafe. It's narrow. The trucks cannot safely pass. They cannot pass parked emergency vehicles or school buses safely. And the road is too winding. It's too hilly, and there is not enough visibility for safe stopping distances.
Gregorio says that the road's exception to geometric design qualification isn't uncommon, but would only make it less safe and not unsafe.
The position being put out necessarily that the report concludes that the road is unsafe is actually misleading, because I don't believe it draws that conclusion.
This is just the latest resident group to raise concerns about the number of gravel pits around Lappy. Zakrewski estimates there are more than 29 existing gravel pits in that area. Corey Nordstrom, TBT News.
Thunder Bay City Council will consider a rezoning application on Monday evening for the former generating station property on Mission Island. Budget Demolition has spent the last 9 months working to demolish the old power plant, which was shut down by OPG in 2018. City Council's decision will alter how the site can be used in the future. If the zoning amendment is approved, it will allow for a wider range of uses. One idea is a computer data center. However, there's currently no specific proposal for the site just yet. Other potential uses include manufacturing, chemical storage, or transportation terminals. Budget Demolition officials say there's a lot of interest in the property and that it's a matter of finding the right use for it. The underground gym and youth center has received another significant donation from a local business. The Valhalla Inn has provided several pieces of used exercise equipment for the gym on East Victoria Avenue. Underground Gym's new location has been open for more than a year now, offering kids and youth a safe place to spend time, exercise, and learn new skills. The Valhalla Inn recently donated 2 treadmills, an elliptical machine, a rower, a weight bench, dumbbells, and 2 racks. Thanks to the donation, the youth center has been able to replace equipment that wasn't working anymore and is able to provide its clients with more options when they come into the gym.
It's a good donation because they've given us some quality treadmills and elliptical rower and some free weights. Yeah, it's helping us. It's going to help us a lot. It's in our fitness area, obviously, and it doesn't affect the rest of the programming that's going on here.
Well, if you missed any of today's local stories or you'd like to see them again, you can find them on tvnewswatch.com. And you can also follow us on social media, of course. Facebook users can find TBT News at TBT News TBay, and on Twitter we can be found at TBT News_TBay. Well, Fiona, not a bad day out there today. A little cool to start things off, but that temperature that we see behind you is acceptable.
We'll call it acceptable, not in the single digits like we'd like to see for this time of year. Normals for February, we're looking at -8, -7, so not quite there, but we did hit a high of -12, and wind chills only making it feel just a few degrees cooler than that. That was after a well, we'll call it a cool night as well, a low of -21, and winds were fairly light. Now, we had clouds most of the day. We've just seen the snow start to move in just in the last couple of hours. And if we take a look at what's moving through, it's a fairly solid system that's pushing in, bringing a fair amount of snow, and unfortunately behind it, some very cold temperatures, but not here just yet. Currently, Fort Frances at -7. It's got wind chills of about -13. If we head up further north, a little bit cooler in Red Lake at -11, but the winds are starting to pick up, and wind chills are closer to about -19. They've had snow pretty much all day. That cooler air is already being felt as you move into Pickle Lake and Armstrong, both at -15 and -16. Still a little milder in Greenstone. They saw the snow begin a couple of hours ago. They're currently at -12 and a wind chill of about -16. Marathon -13 at this hour. And Sault Ste. Marie had a much milder day for the most part, but temperatures are starting to fall. They're currently at -6 and a wind chill of about -11. Now, here in the city of Thunder Bay, as that blob that you saw on the map is moving our way, it's going to bring up to, well, around 10 centimeters, possibly up to 15, but we're gonna say about 10 is safe. And as you can see, the overnight low not really moving all that much. In fact, our high for the day of -12 is colder than our overnight low, which means, yes, temperatures are going to be on the rise overnight. Wind chills around -16, and that's with winds from the southwest at times up to 41 kilometers per hour. Now, as that system moves in, it's moving quickly. It's going to kind of dump the snow and then run. But unfortunately, there is sharply cold air following behind it. And that means tomorrow, about midday, you're going to see temperatures start to plummet. And I will have more details on what you're dealing with later on in the news hour.
Okay, thanks a lot, Fiona. Well, of course, the big story continues to be those blockades and protests, convoy protests. There are now blockades at a number of different Canada-U.S. border crossings. And of course, the big one in Ottawa, that still remains as well. We'll have all the latest details for you as your Thursday News Hour continues.
I just want these mandates dropped. I'm here fighting for my kids, and I will stay here as long as they don't put me in jail.
There are now 4 blockades at 4 separate border crossings in Canada. Today, the federal government promised swift action as more RCMP resources are being sent in. In Ottawa, the Freedom Convoy is still holding the line, with some even protesting with their children. That continues to hamper police efforts to remove them. Creason Ajkate has more.
For the 4th consecutive day, North America's biggest trading corridor is shut down.
We just want these mandates dropped. I'm here fighting for my kids, and I will stay here as long as they don't put me in jail.
$400 million worth of goods a day, many of those from the auto sector, have been cut off on the Ambassador Bridge between Detroit and Windsor. 5 car plants on both sides of the border have now halted production, leaving many workers without pay. Police have previously been able to keep at least one lane opened, but protesters have now blocked that too.
There's a real threat of violence here. We've seen protesters come up with tire irons when the police attempted to tow a car.
Those who rerouted to the Blue Water Bridge in Sarnia were met with more delays from another blockade.
It's economic terrorism is what it is. It's that simple. It's not about freedom. It's actually denying other people the right to employment.
In southern Manitoba, large vehicles have also blocked the border crossing in Emerson. Similar to what's been seen in Coutts, Alberta, RCMP are now issuing tickets to those blocking the road, and police tried to move protesters to an alternate location, but were met with resistance.
To make sure that we can get trade and travel going again, and that is going to be our unwavering focus.
The blockade in the nation's capital has now reached day 14.
Do you need something specific to a child? CAS will help, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Fair enough.
This morning, police told protesters where to go if they need supplies for their children. Police previously estimated that 25% of the protesters have brought their children with them.
We have everything we need for our child here. Like, what's the difference between being here or in the camping right now? It's the same thing.
Ottawa's airport was also targeted for those calling for mandates to be lifted. Today, the Prime Minister again provided no clear plan to remove the blockades.
These barricades are unacceptable. They are impacting on regular Canadians.
Today, Ottawa police announced they removed a number of trucks and handed out more than 1,700 tickets. They are calling for more resources as they expect more demonstrators to be here by the weekend. Chris Nachkate, CTV News, Ottawa.
And a late update to this story. The Ontario government says it has successfully petitioned a court to freeze access to donations to the truckers' protest through the Give, Send, Go platform. About $8.4 million had been raised on that platform. And again, this is after, if you'll recall, GoFundMe froze donations through that platform as well. So we'll see what happens with that continuing story. Well, the blockades at the border were a hot topic during question period in the House of Commons today. The Conservatives are calling for a meeting with the Prime Minister, but Justin Trudeau suggests the Conservatives are part of the problem.
It's been almost 2 weeks since the beginning of this impasse. We all want the protests to end and these Canadians to feel like they've been heard and respected. But now critical infrastructure is being restricted. Why? Because of this Prime Minister's failure. I've asked the Prime Minister to meet with me and the other opposition leaders in good faith to try to find a way forward from this impasse. He didn't answer yesterday. He hasn't answered to date. I'm going to ask him again. Will he meet with us?
Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party of Canada has spent the last 2 weeks endorsing and enabling these blockades across the country. The leader of the Conservative Party and her team have been their biggest champions, even promoting their fundraising. The consequences of these actions are having dire impacts. They're impacting trade, they're hurting jobs, they're threatening our economy, and they're obstructing our communities. I am focused on ending it. I hope the leader of the opposition will maintain her current position and continue to call for an end to these blockades.
Well, meanwhile, the federal government is being urged to eliminate COVID testing for people arriving on international flights. The tourism industry call is being backed up by some infectious disease specialists who say the testing method is out of date, it's gotten too expensive, and the isolation periods aren't practical. Sean Leathong explains.
In order to fly in and out of Canada, COVID-19 PCR testing remains a requirement. But one group is saying that it's time to move on.
Everyone understands that getting back to normal will be a long and challenging road. But Canadians tell us they are eager to travel, and Canadian tourism businesses are ready to welcome the world back to Canada.
At a news conference at Pearson Airport, the Canadian Travel and Tourism Roundtable says that current COVID-19 testing requirements are outdated. Currently, a negative PCR test is required to get on a plane in Canada. Anyone entering Canada is required to show proof of vaccination and proof of a negative PCR test that's less than 72 hours old for anyone 5 years and older. and travelers may be subject to a randomized test on arrival.
I think we have to recognize what happened in the last 2 months in Ontario and Canada.
At today's announcement, Dr. Zane Chagla from McMaster University says that previous travel testing was necessary, but the Omicron variant has made the reality on the ground much different.
But recognizing that travel risks are evening out to the risks of getting COVID locally, and the control of COVID locally is not as optimal as it should be. Recognizing Omicron is a very, very highly contagious variant, really does have to be framed in this travel argument.
Some say that while the situation is changing, randomized testing remains a good way to measure the virus.
I think that you still should be testing, one in pick a number of people coming into the country routinely.
The call from the Travel and Tourism Roundtable is for testing requirements for vaccinated travelers to end as soon as possible. Shantley Thong, CTV News.
Overseas now, Russia has ramped up its military exercises in Belarus. This as the international community continues to work to find a diplomatic solution and avoid a Russian invasion of Ukraine. Richard Engel has more.
International diplomatic efforts are continuing to try to prevent a possible Russian invasion, but militarily, Russia is continuing to build up its forces, and starting today, Russia entered a new phase of military drills in the country of Belarus. Russia has about 30,000 troops and tanks, anti-aircraft system, fighter jets, all in Belarus. For the first 10 days of February, troops were building up in the country, which is just to the north of the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. And starting today, the military exercises in Belarus entered an active phase. So many more vehicles on the move, artillery and tanks firing, weapon systems being turned on. And many here in Ukraine worry that this could be a dress rehearsal for some sort of invasion, because the capital, Kiev, is very close to the Belarusian border, and some of the Russian troops have taken up positions that could allow them to use the highways to get right to Kiev should they be given the orders to cross over the border and launch an invasion of Ukraine. That's just to the north. There had already been a massive military presence along the long eastern border with Russia, and now military exercises are set to increase here in the south. Naval exercises with ships passing through the Bosphorus on their way to the Black Sea, with naval exercises, Russian naval exercises set to begin over the next several days in the Azov Sea and in the Black Sea. And Ukrainian officials say that these naval exercises will cut off this country's access to both the Azov Sea and the Black Sea. Russia says that it will not do that. But for many people here in this country, they are feeling surrounded, with the eastern flank with Russia already reinforced, hot military exercises in Belarus, and naval exercises coming here in the south. Richard Engel, NBC News, Mariupol, Ukraine.
Okay, a strange one from back here in Ontario. A woman is in custody in Toronto after allegedly stealing a fire truck and driving around the city early this morning. Police were called to a fire station east of the downtown core around 4:45. They say someone broke in and drove the fire truck through the bay door. A low-speed pursuit ensued and came to an end about a 10-minute drive from the station, where a 28-year-old woman was arrested. Well, Canada's main stock exchange took a downward turn today. Let's take a look. The TSX fell 72 points to 21,531. In New York, the Dow plummeted 526 points to 35,241. And the Nasdaq shed 304 points, dropping to 14,185. The Canadian dollar is down slightly, just a 1/100th of a cent, at 78.85 cents US. Gold ticked up 80 cents to $1,837 an ounce. And oil added 22 cents, reaching $89.88 a barrel.